Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnah Pesachim, Perek Yud, Chapter 10, Mishnah Tes, Mishnah 9, and this is the final Mishnah of Mishnah Pesachim. Hashem, tomorrow we start the next Meseches, which is Shkalim. Okay. Now, we know that the carbon Pesach is eaten at night. How much during the night can you eat it? How long for the night do you have? So actually, practically speaking, everybody agrees from a practical halacha point, you have to eat the carbon Pesach by midnight, by chatzos, by halachic midnight. But midarais, according to Torah law, we actually have a machlokes, an argument between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva. It's not recorded in this Mishnah. According to Rabbi Azariah, you can only, even according to Torah law, you can only eat the carbon Pesach up to chatzos, up to halachic midnight. According to Rabbi Akiva, you have the whole night to eat it. It's just that the Rabbanan, the rabbis made a fence. They made a precautionary decree so that you don't come to basically push off things for later in the night. That therefore they said the limit is chatzos, is midnight. But our Mishnah really has to be focusing on what the Torah law is, and the Mishnah says a Pesach achar chatzos. The carbon Pesach achar chatzos until after midnight. After midnight, rather. Metame asayadayim. It will make your hands impure. And the Mishnah then says, "Hapigol v'hanoisar." Will explain what pigol is, but pigol and noisar, pigol and what's left over. Metame asayadayim, make your hands impure. Now there is something called nosar. Nosar means what's left of the carbon meat after the time allowed to eat it. Carbon has a limited amount. All carbonates have limited amount of times to eat them. And anything that is still left over after that time allowance becomes what's called nosar, leftover. You're not allowed to eat it. Serious punishment of kares if you eat it. So that's nosar. And so a carbon pesach, the Mishnah is saying a carbon pesach after midnight is considered nosar. It's considered leftover. It's past the time for eating. And when that happens, it makes your hands impure. The Rabbanan made a decree. This is a rabbinic form of impurity, that these that nosar, leftover carbon, if somebody touches it, it makes your hands impure. Now, according to Torah law, there's no such a thing as only your hands being impure. That's a rabbinic law. But the point is that the rabbis did institute this impurity of the hands, and the practical ramification of that is that were you to touch truma or a carbon with these hands, you would invalidate it. Again, rabbinically, but it would be invalidated. The kohen wouldn't be able to eat it.
Post facto.
So if it comes out that if you have the nosar has the ability to make your hands impure, and the reason they did this was actually because they were trying to deter the fact that people were leaving over from the carbon and not eating it afterwards, and leaving it, allowing it to go past the time, and then not being allowed to eat it. That was making the carbon meat become invalidated. It has to be burnt. So therefore, they instituted this decree. So the Mishnah is saying the Pesach achar chatzos, the carbon Pesach after midnight, metame asayadayim, makes your hands impure. Now, the fact that we say this happens for the carbon Pesach after chatzos, after midnight, means that our Mishnah is following the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who says that the Torah's limit for eating the carbon Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, is after halachic midnight. And therefore, since, according to Torah law, this is nosar, this is leftover, it makes your hands impure. According to Rabbi Akiva, who says the mitzvah, according to Torah, you can eat the carbon Pesach the whole night, it only becomes nosar by the next morning. And therefore, it only make your hands impure by the next morning. But the Mishnah is saying that the carbon Pesach, after it's time for being eaten, will make your hands, if you touch it, it makes your hands impure. You're going to touch it because you have to do something with it. It's going to make your hands impure. Hapigol. Then the Mishnah said, "Hapigol v'anoisar," to kind of explain to us the rule that this rabbinic form of impurity applies to nosar, leftover, and pigol. What is pigol? Pigol means that if a kohen performs one of the services of a carbon, slaughtering, catching the blood in a bowl, taking the blood to the altar, or throwing it on the altar, with the intent that it will be eaten or burned on the altar, or its blood will be thrown on the altar, after the biblically permitted time for that activity. That's what he had in mind. Why did he have that in mind? But he did. No question why necessarily. He did. He had that in mind. Actually, he may have it in mind. Post the fact, the Torah says if you have those thoughts and it invalidates it, once to get back at someone, he doesn't like someone, he'll take his carbon and have this improper thought and mess it up. But the first part is that this idea of pigul, the idea that if you have these thoughts, and again, you have these thoughts during any of these four parts of the carbon service or the sacrifice service, and again, the thoughts being eaten, burned, or the blood thrown on the altar after the time the Torah allows you to do it. If that's what you had the thought, it makes it pigul. Once it becomes pigul, it is immediately invalidated. Meaning it's not going to be validated if you had it. When I slaughtered it, I had in mind I was going to throw the blood in the wrong time. If that was your thought when you slaughtered it, from that point on, it is the carbon is invalidated. You don't have to wait to fulfill what you thought. Rather, at that point itself, when you had the thought, that will invalidate the carbon, and at that point, the carbon will have the ability to make your hands tamei. The reason that the rabbis instituted that pigul makes your hands tamei is, again, we're trying to deter a Kohen from intentionally validating someone's sacrifice because he's got something against him. And therefore, all this institution of making the hands impure from pigul and nosar, again, were to deter these things from happening. And again, the ramification of your hands being tamei is that if those hands now come into contact with either truma or sacrifices, it will invalidate them. Okay, that's the first part of the Mishnah. Then the Mishnah continues. Now, quick introduction. Before we do a mitzvah, we make a bracha, right? We make a blessing. Okay. Before eating the carbon Pesach, the bracha was that was the bracha you made before eating the carbon Pesach. Okay, now you already said hamotzi before, so you don't have to make a bracha on the meat, but you made a bracha on the mitzvah. So before you ate from the carbon Pesach, you made a bracha asher kedeshanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu le'achal haPesach. That's they don't. One second. Let's make sure I got the right. Yeah, the tzivanu le'achal haPesach. That's what the Rashba brings down. Now, when you bring a carbon, right? Say you bring a carbon shlamim, and you eat from it. Again, you make a bracha. There, the bracha is asher kedeshanu b'mitzvaysa v'tzivanu le'achal hazevach, to eat the sacrifice. That's the bracha you make before eating any sacrifice. So now, as we've learned previously, along with the carbon Pesach, you would have another carbon, the carbon Chagiga. The Chagiga Yadal, the Chagiga of the 14th of Nisan, which was really an animal that was brought in case you needed it to fill yourself up before eating from the carbon Pesach. That's what it was brought for. The carbon Pesach, as we said, has to be eaten at a point of the meal that you're already kind of full, and the carbon Pesach is going to complete that fullness, complete that satisfaction. Now, if you have a big enough carbon Pesach, you can just do that all with the carbon Pesach. But if the carbon Pesach itself cannot fill you and allow you to finish your meal, so to speak, with the carbon Pesach, then used to bring an Erev Pesach, you'd offer a carbon shlamim. It was called the Chagiga of the 14th, and you would basically fill yourself up from that animal, and then the final point of the final point of fullness of satisfaction came with the carbon Pesach. So you got two karbanos here. You got two sacrifices. How many brachas do you make? Well, let's see. Let's see. Beirach brachas haPesach. If you made a bracha over the carbon Pesach, patar eshal zevach, that exempts the blessing over the other carbon. Why? Because the other carbon only came really to help you do the carbon Pesach properly. It's not like we have a separate mitzvah to eat the carbon Chagiga. It's there in order to make sure that the carbon Pesach should be eaten that in a way that it brings you to the point of full satisfaction. So being that the shlamim is secondary to the carbon Pesach, the bracha on the carbon Pesach would cover the mitzvah of eating the carbon the chagiga. Now, let's just read a little further. Berach es shel zevach. Let's say you made a bracha first on the chagiga. Lo pater shel pesach. It's not going to exempt the carbon pesach because again, the chagiga is secondary to the pesach. So therefore, the secondary mitzvah is not going to cover the primary mitzvah. So the bracha on the zevach, the bracha on the chagiga is not going to exempt the carbon pesach. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. These are the words of Rabbi Yishmael. Now, practically speaking, which one do you eat first?
The Pesach, because
Which one? You're sitting there by the Seder. Which pasha you eat? The chagiga first, right?
Yeah.
Pasha you eat the chagiga first, because that's the whole point. Fill yourself up, right, with the chagiga, so that then the carbon pesach will be eaten ala seva. The carbon pesach will be eaten to complete the satisfaction. So when it says so the first case, making a bracha on the pesach can cover the shlemen, can cover the chagiga. What would be that situation? So they bring it out like this. Usually, the pesach is eaten after the chagiga. It can, however, also be eaten beforehand as long as some of it is saved for the end. Theoretically, right? You could start eating a little bit from your carbon pesach, right? Switch over to the carbon chagiga, and then make sure that at the end you still have a carbon pesach left to bring yourself to the final point. So that would be the situation where you could be making the bracha over the carbon pesach before you eat the carbon chagiga. Now, then the Mishnah says, if you made the bracha on the zevach and the bracha on the chagiga first, it's not going to exempt the carbon pesach. Okay, in that case, you got to make two brachas. So, which one are you supposed to do? What's the preferred way? Is a preferred way to make the bracha on the carbon pesach and cover the carbon chagiga? And how do you do that? Well, you start off with a little bit of the carbon pesach, go to the carbon chagiga, and then make sure you finish with the carbon pesach. Or maybe it's either way. Maybe you could start with the carbon chagiga if you wanted to, and you'll make a bracha on it, and then you make another bracha on the carbon pesach. It's not clear to me. It's not clear to me like which one is it, or either way okay. Is one preferable, and the other one is well. This is what if this is what happened? So it's not clear to me. I don't know for sure. I don't know. Now, Rabbi Kiva says, Lo yizay patera zay v'lo patera zay. Neither exempts the other one, no matter which one you start off with. Even if you start off with the carbon pesach, even if you start off eating the Paschal sacrifice, that bracha on that will not cover the bracha on the chagiga sacrifice. And that's because Rabbi Kiva says it's true that the carbon chagiga comes for the purposes of the carbon pesach, but being that they are two separate mitzvahs at the end, they're two separate mitzvahs. One is a mitzvah of eating a carbon shlamim. Why eating the carbon shlamim? Because I needed to make sure I do the carbon pesach right. But it's a mitzvah in itself. It is a carbon shlamim. It itself is its own mitzvah to eat. So being that these are two separate mitzvahs, therefore each one has its own bracha, and one cannot exempt the other one. Have a wonderful day. Okay, and like with this, Mazel Tov, we finished Meseches Psachim, and Mitzvah Shem tomorrow we start Meseches Shkolim.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Mazel tov.